Welcome to the Keen on Yoga podcast, bringing you the stories of many people who in various ways are attempting to walk the path of yoga. Our intention is to inspire your own practice and commitment to yoga beyond the mat and in all areas of life. We consider this an offering, a service to the community and labour of love. If you feel inclined, any donations are appreciated. Just visit our page and click the donate button at www.keenonyoga.co.uk/podcast. I hope you enjoy the show. My guest on the Keen on Yoga podcast today is Kathy Cooper. Kathy has practiced Ashtanga Yoga consistently since 1976. David Williams and Nancy Gilgoff were her primary teachers and taught her all of the series and the pranayama. She also studied with Pattabhi Jois on many trips to the US and in Mysore. Kathy feels the inherent wisdom of Ashtanga has led her on a transformative journey. Being present in the body in connection to the breath and bandhas are the key to emotional, physical, and wellness in the body and mind. She's explored Sufism, Shamanism, and Vipassana meditation. She was also a teacher of the Montessori method in the UK. Her love of yoga keeps on the mat daily and supports her journey even up to today. Welcome to the Keen on Yoga podcast, Kathy.
It's a pleasure.
Pleasure to have you, Kathy. So can you just give us a little bit of background about how you started, how you got into yoga? Something basic.
All right. So I was living in Lake Tahoe, and I had three very powerful dreams over a period of a year to go to Hawaii, but they weren't like regular dreams. It was like I swam there. I knew nobody there. And so within about a year and a half, I went to Hawaii. And my mother had given me a book on yoga. She took one yoga class, and it was an Indian book, and it seemed very foreign to me, but I tried a few things. So I got to Hawaii and was living on Maui in Lahaina.
When was that?
In 1975. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what happens when you're older, you know.
Yeah, I was just thinking back. That's 45 years ago.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah.
Right. So I went there, and I was just open to being in Hawaii and the beauty of it. It wasn't really developed yet. So there weren't a lot of hotels and things. And we'd go to Mr. Natural's health food store, and then I'd have to go to every single store to get enough ingredients to make a meal. It was just another time in another world. And I left to go back to my parents for a little while. And right before I left in California, I heard there was these yogis here. These yogis just came. So I came back in 5 months because I was just absolutely drawn to something about these yogis. It was like a call. Mm-hmm. And in that time, I know Danny Paradise and some other Forrest, I forget his last name, different people were practicing with David and Nancy. So I asked David, I saw him in the grocery store, and he said, well, we only start with one student at a time because we don't have a shala. So eventually he took me on. I had to commit to a month. But Nancy taught me in the park outside in Lahaina. And she started me with one salutation. Next day, 2 salutations. So she built it up slowly. And I remember I was doing Bhujapidasana, and people are walking by, going to the Pioneer Inn. And then Forrest had created a little kind of junk. They were called wattle trees, this little frame, and then plastic over.
Yeah, David's supposed to talk about that. Yeah. Basically, it's like if you weren't hot enough already, it was like a greenhouse.
Yeah, right.
But David and Nancy had already been to Mysore by that time, so they told you a bit of the background, and there's this guy in Mysore, and this is where we're going, right?
Right, and they were very strict in class.
Yeah,
and this was one of the biggest teachings for me that I loved. Is no matter what they were helping us. No, there were no yoga mats then, so I had this stupid beach towel that was always in my way, or the dirt ground. And I always remember that no matter what was going on, we were to take the energy and turn it back in. not leak it out. We didn't laugh. We just, if we needed help, we got help. They were there. But it was I would say we just let go and did our practice, right? And then at the end, we would rest in another little tiny plastic dwelling. And we were told never to speak.
Right.
That we rested 15 minutes. So I got a very good foundation.
Uh-huh.
I really did.
Yeah.
Because that makes a huge difference. If you're always looking to the teacher and because it was all Mysore style, there was no such thing as led class.
How many students were around at that time?
I think there were about 10 of us.
Right.
And I believe I'm still in touch with a lot of them are still my really good friends.
And anyone we know? Anyone we know there?
Elena Berg, she lives on Maui. She was one of the early students. Lynn Hyman, who used to be Lynn Burwald. Danny Paradise was there. Forrest, who started it when I was teaching in Brazil, he got in touch with me. He was living in Brazil at that time. Then I heard he since has passed away. He had gotten a liver transplant many years ago. So David Swenson replaced David and Nancy after 4 months, and David Swenson was 19. He was like he wasn't chubby because he ate a lot. He was still like a boy. Right. He had long blonde hair. And now he's so slim with his not so much hair.
He was kind of chubby, was he?
Not chubby in a fat way, but like a boyish body.
Okay.
Even though he was doing advanced yoga. I have a picture of him somewhere, but I can't find it. He was climbing a coconut tree. And he was so playful and so young. It was a very different energy from David and Nancy. In that, he brought himself to the practice, but he was just such a great guy. So it was very fun.
And for people that don't know, this is David Williams and Nancy Gilgoff. And what is your take on David and Nancy? I mean, what did you think of them at the time? And you've remained in contact with them, or? Well,
we don't see each other much anymore, but yes, periodically we are. I haven't been on Maui for about 3 years, and David was away when I was there last time, though I'd contacted him. And Nancy was there, and I went to class one day. It was very nice to see her. But I'll tell you that it was my first natural experience of having what I would call the guru, because it wasn't that he tried to put himself up on a platform at all, or up on a pedestal at all. It's just that I was so grateful every day to this practice. It was outside of anything of my experience. And I have to add this at the very beginning. It never worked for me to read about yoga.
Right.
Other than to read Light on Yoga to see something about a pose.
They didn't suggest you, go and read the Yoga Sutras or anything like that then?
Well, they were doing whatever they were doing, but I'll tell you what happened. I was having such a powerful inner awakening through the practice. If I would read something, it would conflict my mind to try and grasp after something. Like, this is what it's supposed to be. And I had such a very unique experience with this practice for many, many years that every time I tried to read something, it was just like imposing something on myself. So I didn't for a long time. And that was just how alive the practice was, and how I felt.
They just brought you it, and then they just left you alone to your own devices to kind of process it how you did, right?
Well, it's funny. I read something in Light on Life. I read this little portion by Mr. Iyengar, and he talked about, hey, we got the basics, and that was it. And then it was up to us to develop it. And in a way, it's a great gift, because for me personally, because I didn't have anything imposed on me. I learned the basic practice, and we didn't get near the instruction. No alignment, nothing. And I sorted these things out in myself, and they've come to, I think it's really important to have the balance of a wise alignment with the breath and the abundance.
I kind of wondered that, like, what did the instruction entail then? If it
entailed you focus on your breath and the bandhas.
But how did they actually teach? What did they actually do?
Well, they showed you the pose.
Okay.
And we didn't even have, you may have heard this before, maybe from David, we didn't have very many vinyasas. We would do 3 of each salutation. Then we would do some standing, and several of the pravritas were not part of it at that point. They got added later. And I think Danny Paradise was the reason for one of them, because he was teaching us all one, and then Guruji added his own version
for it. Paravrita Parsvakanasana, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But so we would do all 3 Janu Shirsasanas before we would do one vinyasa. We didn't do vinyasas between poses, nothing. So the way, and as soon as I knew first series by heart, they started me on second series.
Yeah.
So I love how I learned, because then for 2 years, when David and Nancy left to go to India after 4 months, they said, okay, you come back here in 2 years. And
were they adjusting at the time? And were they adjusting you, or, because I know
yes, because like I would fall over in Marichasana D at the time if they didn't adjust me. Yeah, so you got help if you needed it, hands-on, but very little verbal.
Yeah, I know he's not into being adjusting or being adjusted, really. So I was wondering,
No.
Right.
Well, I was with David for a few years too. We helped each other in different ways. But that early on, they were very strong in their, everyone was strong in the adjustments early on. Yeah. I never liked that. But what was interesting about it, David and Nancy said, you do first series one day, second series the next. You practice 6 days a week, and you come back in 2 years and we'll begin teaching you advance. Now, this is the important thing. You may have heard this before, but I cannot tell you. It was before people phoned each other long distance, hardly at all. We wrote letters occasionally. But for 2 years, I went back. I went to Oregon and was going to college, and I was practicing all the time. And in 2 years, I showed up back on Maui, not having been in contact with any of the other people. And they had started teaching the week before at the Deva farm. And we all showed up within a week of each other, all of it.
Yeah.
Without ever having spoken to David and Nancy, ever having. And that shows you it was very powerful.
That must have been amazing. Yeah. To all come back like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just believed them. And David also said what he meant and meant what he said. He never minced words at the time. He was not a person of a lot of conversation.
What about the handstands? Because obviously David Swenson's kind of famous for a lot of handstands in the early days with the practice. And I mean, were they? How was the practice taught to you? I mean, you said no Janu Shirshasana vinyasas. Were you encouraged in the handstanding, or was there what differences did you notice?
I was with David in that same little tent when I tried my first handstand, and the first one I didn't have a good luck with it, so I didn't do it for some time. But then, you have little by little, the vinyasas started to come in. But when we learned advance, we learned it the old way, which I, of course, love, because it was a beautiful flowing dance without so many vinyasas. But then everybody at the end of class, there were 2 things we did, because this was Maui. We were very far away. Plus, I think David and Nancy, a few people went to India. I had a little child at the time. It didn't seem like the appropriate thing to do for me to head out, because it wasn't safe then. People would get sick.
Yeah.
So I didn't go with her. But at the end of class, you'd go into a handstand and they'd walk you around the room holding your feet. So we used to walk all around the room at the end of class.
That was their own little appendage to it, was it?
Yeah. And also, I'm not sure if this started there or not, but some people, I never got into this. Some people would do.
Never heard of that. Brilliant.
Would be doing Navasana and then go up into handstand and then come back and do the next 5 breaths of Navasana, go into handstand. It was around. So I'm not sure if it started there, but that was one of the things I didn't pick up. I didn't go that route. It didn't attract me at the time as much. So I just kept on practicing. And then when we were at the Deva farm, David taught us, while he did his own practice, how to teach the students. And then he taught us advanced. And he had a different helper, Leah Johnson, and then Nancy learned with us. So she was she had had a little exposure to advanced, but she actually learned the advanced with us.
Right. So she's learning it from David, essentially. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And when you practice the advanced series, and you mention it, you always practice the old way it was taught, when the advanced series were one series, right? One kind of
advanced day.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yes, I loved that series. It was just magical. And again, it was great. We didn't do that many vinyasas because we were doing one amazing pose after another. That was I think I never felt so strong or so clear. It was like a total love affair, that series. And so when I try doing it the way they do third series now, it feels very chopped up to me, to tell you the truth.
Right.
It's interesting. I'm not judging it. I'm just saying
it's very confusing to me to see it the other way, because I've taught. One time we hosted Nancy and she got sick, and I had to teach the students, and I was so confused at what they were doing. I didn't know whereabouts they were in the practice.
I know. I heard she teaches it the old way.
Yeah, she still teaches it the old way. I couldn't get grips with it. So when you went to Mysore, and you finally went to Mysore, I mean, were you recommended? What did you think of it? What were your experiences there?
Well, I had met Guruji had come to Hawaii in 1980 for 2 months.
Right.
And we did advance with him for 2 months.
Right. You'd already met Pattabhi Jois, yeah.
So I met him, and he came quite a few times. I was a late goer to Mysore, was not my connection to the practice. I learned it all before I met Guruji. And he was very important to me there. And I had experiences with him that I recognized that he definitely was a master asana teacher. That he wasn't my be all and end all spiritually.
How so?
I had my own inner path.
Why did you say he was the master asana teacher?
Because he was the one who came and shared it with us, and he was very precise. That's when we started doing standing vinyasas between the poses, and then jumping back in between each side. And well, I'll tell you one little experience. We're in a room of like 50 or 100 people or something. And I think we were doing, what were we doing? We were just doing a standing pose. And all of a sudden, my left side started twitching. Now, you couldn't see it. And I just noted, gee, I wonder what that is. Guruji came over in the middle of that room, put his hand right there, kept talking, and then went away. It was unbelievable because there was nothing to witness. There was nothing to see.
Right.
And then he just walked over from the middle. I wasn't doing anything to call any attention. There was nothing outer about the experience. So he went away. I was like, who is this person that was so tuned in? I mean, that was my first big whoa. And for some reason, and this is no disrespect to Guruji, no matter how many times I tried to give it away, to look up to someone and put them on a pedestal, life always brought me back to my inner self. It doesn't mean that I didn't respect them, but I could never give it up to them.
Right.
Even though I had great respect for him as a teacher. I just need to say that because I tried and it just didn't work for me. And now I think I'm very grateful for that. But at the time, it felt like, how come all these people give it up to the guru and they're the ones that are going to lead them? And it just, no matter how it worked, it just always brought me back inside to listen inside. So there you have it.
What about, have your feelings in the light of more recent, situation with Pattabhi Jois changed at all? In terms of how you...
I'll tell you what.
Now?
I think it's very, very sad the way that it was handled, for me personally.
You're still referring to him as Guruji, for example.
Yes. No, yeah. He gave so much benefit. So he wasn't just some dirty old man. And I never could understand it, but I felt early on, the first time we were with him, I don't know if I want you to say this or not. I don't know if I want you to edit this or not. But there were a couple of women who were very promiscuous.
Right.
And each of them around Maui at the time, and it was kind of, it was the 80s, late 70s, 80s. And both of them said that he touched them not a big deal, but touch them inappropriately. And we'd think, of all the people to say that, you're the most, to us, they were the most inappropriate touching. They were free, So we'd go, really? Huh. And so then, and also Guruji helped women and men the same. And sometimes it seemed like a little intimate where they would touch the women, but it's the way he did it with the men. And so I decided that he just wasn't even going there at all. I mean, it wasn't anything it wasn't like copying a feel. It was just assisting in the most efficient way in the practice. That's how it felt to me.
And then you had experience of the adjustments yourself? No.
Not once, not in all the years that he helped me. But, I don't know so I can't exactly say that, but we used to discuss this and we'd say, well, I don't think emotionally they do emotional work in that part of the world. And maybe he doesn't even relate to it. And the people that would say that he adjusted them in somewhat of an intimate way, but in front of everyone, mind you, they would say, but it didn't feel sexual at all. It was just an adjustment. And David Swanson a few years ago said, well, one thing we know, whatever he did it in front of everyone. So I don't know if as years went on, I don't know anything about that, but he never was that way with me. And again, I think he gave so much to so many people, of this beautiful path that I felt that just to throw him out the window and make him totally bad was really narrow-mindedness. Yeah. I really felt that's how I feel. So, and I don't approve of people, taking advantage of people. It's none of that. Mm-mm. And I could even go on and say more, but I don't think it's that useful to go on about the whole thing.
It's cool to hear your opinions and your experience of it, for sure, yeah. Because everyone has a slightly different take. And it's a practice defined by Pattabhi Jois, in many respects, right? And he certainly, when I started, was very much venerated as something more than just a teacher, indeed a guru. So,
but that's what people gave to him. I never felt like he demanded that of people.
No, I mean, he's famous for saying, I'm not guru,
but I really believed him in that. Yeah. I really believed him. But I will say this, and this is part of being a human being. Why would you take abuse from someone repeatedly for 5 years? Hello? Where is your responsibility? I'm sorry, but that's what it comes back to me. There you have it. That's it. I've said it all.
You've said it now. And moving on from that, I mean, how do you start teaching? Like, where did you get into the teaching of it? And you were a teacher of yoga, but you also were a school teacher as well, right?
Yes, I taught in the Waldorf system or the Steiner system.
Yeah.
But that isn't there. It was a mixture of things. I had opportunities that I did not take early on. And this is the main reason. I loved my practice. And everybody I saw who got teaching compromised their practice.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to. I loved my practice. I learned from my practice. It was like digging a deep hole in the same place for years and years and years. And I think, everybody's out teaching. Why am I not out teaching? I'd go, I'm not ready. Now, what does that mean? I could teach the asanas, no problem. And early on Maui, I did teach a few students. And then David Williams and I became a couple for a few years, and we taught together. So I did teach early on. But at that time, we'd teach, and then we would practice afterwards. And then we do pranayama, and then we never ate until noon every day. And we ate between noon and sunset, and then we didn't eat after that. So we had this, our whole lives were dedicated to that.
So you did eat until midday, nothing, right? And
nothing, because he would drink coffee in the morning. I couldn't drink coffee. I couldn't have any caffeine for many, many years. So I would just get up, and then the students came. I don't think they even came till 8:30. We finished with them about 10, and then we practiced, took rest, did pranayama, and then we would eat. So that was the rhythm we were in. And that was on Maui, where it's warm. So it was easy not to eat. And we taught at the same place we lived. So all of it was, very convenient. So, yeah.
What kind of diet were you having at that time? What was
Indian. We made Indian food every night.
Right.
I got great at chapatis. It's amazing. And we also ate like fresh papayas and made seed yogurt. Basically, we were vegan, even though we didn't talk about it. There was this book out called Diet for the 21st Century. And it was a lot of very clean, simple, kind of Ann Wigmore wheatgrass juice. So we'd have wheatgrass juicers. And we never ate in the evening. The only dessert we had for years, Haagen-Dazs made a honey vanilla ice cream and well, no, that's not true. But the only one commercial was they made a honey carob and a honey vanilla ice cream. But David loved dessert. So we would have desertarian potlucks where everyone would make these raw pies. Everything was super natural, right? I used to make this carob pie with tofu. And, we really ate that before.
Like super early days for that kind of thing, right? Like people are just
we were just making it all up.
Just getting into that now,
I know, it's so interesting to me. I did that so long ago. It was just interesting.
So so what are you doing now? How did you move? How have you moved on? And let me just ask you about your teaching first of all, and go back to that. So you started teaching, and later how did that progress?
So what happened is when I left Hawaii, I went to England for 2 years and became a Waldorf teacher, a Steiner teacher. In Forest Row in East Sussex.
I was going to say somewhere around Brighton. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I had more than one side to myself. And one thing, my daughter went to the Waldorf school in Haleakala, and it just stirred my soul. So I ended up going a few years later, and I did teach yoga there. I did teach yoga eventually students asked me to teach. And, even the Buddhist teacher was telling me yoga was bad and Steiner was an indie yoga. And I thought, they don't know what they're talking about. They're just very much into dogma. I don't believe that was even true, but I didn't ever buy into it. So I was doing my own practice there, just consistently. It's just the way it was, a little bit of teaching, but mostly I really got into studying Steiner. And if you know anything about him, he was incredibly deep. Incredibly deep. There was not you couldn't just read Rudolf Steiner. You had to study him. So I did that for a few years, and I never bought into anybody's telling me. Like, people would come up to me, they knew nothing, and they say, you can't do yoga and be on this path. And even the head of the school in America that I interviewed with before I decided to go to England, he said, they don't mix. And I never bought it. I just thought, well, you don't know what you're talking about.
You continue practicing Ashtanga all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it's strange to people today that I'm just going to point out the fact that you went for a couple of years at least and just did your own practice with no teaching, right?
But you have to understand, until it became more popular as years went on for some students to go and be with Guruji. But I had to earn a living and I had a child, and I loved Guruji, but it wasn't practical for me, and I didn't feel any need. And others like Lynn and Helena, who still live on Maui, they've been practicing on their own for years. We didn't used to go to workshops the way they do.
Pointing out the discrepancy between, kind of like people say, well, how would you practice just on your own for years and keep it up?
Think about what you develop. You develop your own practice.
But also, when you talk about developing it, and, we had a little conversation before, and, we're talking about kind of going into it and processing and not wanting to read about it or have someone else tell you what it was. Can you say more about how the physical practice did something other than just get fit, and more put your finger on something in there? Because it's often kind of nebulous, right? Oh, it does something.
Well, here's the thing.
Yeah.
I used to do rebirthing before I started yoga. Do you know what rebirthing is?
Yeah, they're kind of going into past lives and stuff, right?
No, it's a type of breathing technique where you hyperventilate.
Oh, I thought you were doing that more recently as well, I saw. Isn't it called?
What I'm saying is years ago, I did this practice.
Something.
Or maybe after I started the yoga was my first practices. And I always went very deep. Okay. And part of it is you release your breath and you do not breathe. You are breathed by the universe. And it's very calm after you have a deep release of something. I told you I did a lot of other things along the way. So I even on Maui, I was doing this. And then one day after practice, I had the same experience where my breath, I was in Shavasana, my breath released and I didn't have to breathe. And I don't know how long it was, but I literally was being breathed by the universe. And David said to me, he goes, Kathy, that's the end of yoga. When you have that experience, I was like, wow. But even then I didn't go just try and read about it. So I'm telling you, my journey with Ashtanga Yoga was very, very spiritual and very powerful and very deep. And I didn't need anybody to help me stay on board, to direct me. I always felt that I did it differently, that my goal was, if I'm going to use the word goal, was different than people around me who were they do yoga and go get together and all hang out and eat, yummy food, but still, and I thought, I'm not doing this practice for that reason. I'm doing this practice. I'm really digging into who am I? Right. What is it? And I'm not saying they weren't. I'm just saying my path of doing it was a very unique path that I could not have told you why it was. I couldn't have made up that I knew how I was directing myself.
What were your experiences of this then? Of this experience of kind of developing your knowledge of yourself and, how did that kind of fructify?
I think for years it was I saw who I was not.
Right. Okay.
So I could come into a practice, even though my whole life really was directed around yoga, but I could come into practice and maybe I could feel constricted. This is who I am. By the end of practice, I was connected to everything again. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That openness, that connection to all of life, as opposed to, here I am, this is me. And I over and over and over again, and I felt like I received teachings inwardly for years and years. Even now, I say even now, I feel that way, that occasionally something will come in, I'll be like, wow, that's interesting. But so let's say physically, I would be holding, we were taught to hold our big toe in a lot of poses. Then after a while, you would hold your wrist because you were flexible, right? So you could go deeper. But what I found out, and when you actually hold the big toe and you do it the way you're taught initially, there is something that is happening there that's not the same as when you wrap your hands and grip your wrist around your foot.
In what posture?
So I could say in any of the forward bends.
You're holding the big toe.
I could hold my big toe. I did this for years because I was experimenting. And then
Shasana A, you'd hold the big toe with both hands? Yeah. Both hands.
I'd hold the big toe with my right hand, and then I might hold by the instep of my foot, or I'd hold both.
Okay.
But here's what I found out. Years later, I did this energy work called Shinjutsu, which is a touch for health. The big toe is where the in-breath and the out-breath change. So it's very powerful. I mean, it's like, wow. So there was a lot to that big toe going on. So I would experiment for a long time, or I'd notice, the position of my foot, if it's truly parallel in front of me, not parallel, but I mean, if it's truly, parallel to me in front of me, then my back opened correctly. Now, I'm telling you, I received these kind of teachings for years and years and years. And it guided my path. And then when I would teach, I used to teach for Nancy sometimes when she'd go traveling. So another phase of my life on Maui. And I'd start adding little things in. But, the foundation of focusing on the breath and bandhas never left me. And I realized a lot of people are breathing and they're not breathing connected to their bandhas. Mm. And even though they seem to be breathing deeply, a lot of times it's just automatic breath.
So what's breathing connected to bandhas?
So for me, breathing connected to the bandhas is that I'm always aware of this connection in my physical center. And it does refine over time, but I'm going to just say that it is, it's a muscular engagement. I'm going to say that for now without getting into any more subtlety than that. And when the second I do that, yesterday when I practice, my breath deepens. And it comes from a different place than it's just plain connected. And I've experienced this for years where I go, and it's like it's like beginner's mind, period. I really get what that means to have beginner's mind. It's not an analyzing, it's not any of that. But so many people, they're just breathing out of their belly. And here they are doing great yoga. Because really, it's not that there isn't any movement there, because the whole diaphragm, everything's moving, but it's not so much there. It's like you wanted that prana to really fill. And a lot of people can be very dead right here. And they're doing yoga for a long time. They seem to have a powerful practice, but they're not getting the prana up into this area. And this transforms the heart. You start opening up the heart. The practice itself does, but the breath is so powerful. So these are the kinds of things that for years I was having my own inner journey about.
Right.
And that, I think, when I started to actually after teaching in Sri Lanka, I started to become more known and invited. It's only mattered to me, and of course I need to make a living, but it only mattered to me if it was useful to people. I do not want to try and be out there promoting myself. People say, you do not promote yourself. And I said, I just don't relate to it. I want to give something if there is something that is recognized to be valuable. Otherwise, I'm just one more person. And there's a lot of younger teachers now who are teaching, much more focus on the asanas, and they're, in the prime. So I'm not offering any of that.
What do you reckon characterizes your teaching then, or your style of teaching, as opposed to a younger, teacher?
I can't compare myself to the younger teacher, but I would say that I move from the inner. And I've been studying posture, which is coming from a different tradition that has been very powerful and has also brought together a lot of my recognition over the years of how we want to do both. And that I give a lot of these basic foundations, and you don't hurt yourself when you do this. I have had very little injury. And by that, I mean just from doing something unconsciously or pushing myself too far. Because along the way, it's been important to me. I watch my diet. Oh, this isn't working. What's going on here? How do I work with this without forcing? How do I allow? Years ago on Maui, people who were very affronted by Ashtanga Yoga because it was so physical and so different from what a lot of people thought spirituality was, that people would say to me, they just bring this to me. I'm not patting myself on the back to say this, but they say, oh, I could do yoga the way you do it, because I kept opening to allow to see what was there instead of pushing to get somewhere. It's a totally different place to come from, even if ultimately it seems like you're doing the same thing.
Does it look like the same thing, or did you physically do it?
Well, I had a beautiful practice for a long time. And I could do it. And I didn't force it, and I didn't injure myself to do it. That's the main thing I want to say. It wasn't like I had to break my body apart in order to do this. It's just, I also felt too, and nowadays, this is one of my big teachings. I feel like I really had a mystical teaching come to me. If you are not resting, you are not integrating your practice. You're not releasing your nervous system. You just pop up after a few minutes and on you go. You're still on. You are going to burn yourself out. You are going to hurt yourself. So that's one of my big teachings, because I learned that you have to really, truly let go. And Guruji said one time, many people not doing Shavasana. Mm-hmm. Shavasana, very advanced pose. And I really knew what he was talking about. So
it's true. Yeah. I mean, and it's hard sometimes to do it for a period of time, but yeah, it's very much neglected.
No, it's much harder to do that than to be active. But if you don't have the balance.
But if you do then rest in it for 5 minutes, then it's hard to get up again. That's what I found.
That's okay, because then you're spaced out, you're open, you're soft, and then there you get going. That's what I'm saying. That's why I did not teach for many years, because I saw how many people who taught gave it over to the teaching and their own practice suffered. When you're really young, you can get away with anything, but it doesn't work. And for some reason, I don't know why, I've been, I just had this inner guidance. I don't even know how to say it. Nothing else in my life has been like this. Yeah, I've had to find my way in many other ways that haven't been so connected like this. But Mark Roberts, I met him last year in Bali at this confluence. And one thing he got very excited about in meeting me, which was very touching, was that I was healthy. I was an older Ashtanga who had a good practice, and I was healthy. Instead of having drunk a lot of coffee to show up. I'm not judging anyone. I don't know what anybody else does. I'm not around them. But I'm just saying that he got really excited. And that was very touching to me.
I think he spoke on the podcast about how he felt that looking at a lot of the older Ashtangas, kind of how they'd gone, that, he felt like maybe it wasn't the best for physical health all the time, and the way, or a certain way of practicing it, maybe, that's his justification for handstands anyway.
No, I agree completely. And again, I was always drawn to do that.
How would you say that you practice differently for listeners than just simply pushing yourself, or, is there anything that you can say, a quality or a way of doing something, or, just to give a kind of an example?
So in Sri Lanka, when I was teaching, I would get up, roll out of bed, and end up on my mat, which was, my room was right next door to the shala. And there were very occasionally, I would almost not sleep all night for no good reason. Mostly I slept fine, but every now and then I'd get up and I'd go, okay, I'll stand at the front of my mat and I'm going to see what's going to happen. I didn't know if I had it. And what happened, because it wouldn't go on for nights on end, is this energy would start coming up in me. I go, oh, okay, I can do more. Okay. And then I would just flow on the energy. I feel like that's what I've done. You might say that I feel like early on, I worked out of my muscles. And then as time went on, I felt like I worked out of my organs. Then as time went on, I feel like I'm moved by the prana. That's, if I would try and articulate it, that's what I would say. So the energy would just start arising. Then I could end up having a great practice, have my good 15-minute rest, take a shower, and teach. Even if later in the day I took a nap or something. You know what I'm saying? Whatever I needed to do. Mm-hmm. But that's what I mean. What's here? What's going to happen? Not, okay, I've got to get through this because then I'm going to... Because that's the opposite of what I'm actually... what's happening. That's the opposite of what I'm not only wanting to accomplish, but what is real to me.
So. And what would you say you've accomplished, and what does progress mean for you now? I mean, you started in 75, you're now over 70 years old, I believe. Like, how does it look now for you? What do you do now?
Okay, so what I do now, every now and then I do a few advanced poses, but I mostly don't do advanced poses anymore. What I do now is, and since I want to add one, I do first series occasionally, I do second series, but since the COVID happened and I was in Ohio and stuff, I started doing things I'd never done, which is I do part of first and then I do part of second. Then the next day I might start with some of second and then finish some of first and then do my pranayama. And you know what? I've had a lot of fun with it. And it just felt like that's what I wanted to do. And years ago, Guruji said, when you mastered this, and again, you have to understand that I'm not doing all the asanas anymore. I do all first and second, but I mean, I'm not doing all of the, advanced asanas or anything. But he would say you would choose some poses and then do them for 50 breaths.
Right.
Well, I don't do that. But what I do is I know when I'm copping out of myself. I know. So I know now what I can do. And sometimes it's just fun to combine them. And, and it's still efficient amount of time. I'm not going to practice. I don't feel the longing or the need to practice for 2 hours. Right. I have a great practice that's very efficient in about an hour. And it always feels good, So whatever I do, it ends up to be about an hour. Then I take rest. And then I'm doing a different pranayama than the Ashtanga pranayama now.
Yeah. And what's an efficient practice look for? Well, more do you?
It means I don't waste breaths.
Okay.
I can do these poses. And, it's not, I did have a compression in my back from lifting a heavy pot. I love to garden. And I've always been so strong. And I did compress my back. So for a few years, when I would get to Kapotasana, I had to adjust. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, I never assumed that I couldn't do it. I've just every day show up and see what I can do. And I'm actually quite pleased with how it's going. So other than that, I just go along. I make sure I'm staying in my breath. And I do my practice and flow along. And some days are more wonderful than others, meaning that I flow with it in a way that is just really rewarding. And other times I now don't always feel that, but I still do it and I still receive.
Still carry on.
Absolutely.
What about the prana though? Is that if the prana isn't flowing, wouldn't you just then honor that and stop just to play devil's advocate?
No, because sometimes I have to, it takes me a while to figure out what is, it's not that the prana, it's just not pure freedom. As opposed to pure freedom. It's not like I'm not breathing and I'm not moving. So absolutely. So one thing that has happened in this past year that I've seen that people have said to me, how have you changed your practice? And I said, honestly, I still practice the way I've always practiced. And basically I do, but I can see it's not that I'm not capable of doing something, but I can see that, how do I say I'm feeling my age without putting it in a negative way? It's not like I'm getting stiff or that I can't do. It might be that some days I have as much energy as I've ever had, and some days I don't have as much energy.
Right.
And if I want to do other things because I garden a lot and I'm cooking and I'm running, then I'll go, okay, I don't want to give all of myself to this because then all I can do is take a nap this afternoon. Whereas I never had that. So I would, and it's not all the time, but it is sometimes. So
what about mixing it up? What's your reason? I mean, because obviously, did Pattabhi Jois recommend that ultimately you mix it up, or what? Yeah.
Yeah, and if I wanted to, that's where sometimes. No, I would just say because, I enjoy doing both, and I'm not going to do both all in one day. I never did. See, this is another thing. I just want to make one comment about this. It's going back, but it relates obviously to the whole. The way I learned was all of first series, and then I added on some second series poses. But at a certain point, I split the practice, did primary one day, second the next. And I learned all of second within a few months, I think, even though I still had to perfect it, because that's what a practice is. So I never had the intimidation of you can't go on until you get this next pose. I think it's complete malarkey, personally. So
I was going to ask you how do you feel that how has the presentation of the teaching changed since you started?
Very different, it's very different. And so what it does is somebody can have a beautiful practice, and for whatever reason they have trouble doing a pose, and it could be not because maybe they're kind of big and they can't bind, but it could be because their mind has gotten intimidated by this doing Pinchamayurasana or something. So here they do a gorgeous practice. So what I'd say is, okay, well, every day show up with this pose, See, we never did long, like, okay, work with this pose for 10 minutes.
Right.
We do it. We were never attached to it, and we moved on. So that lack of attachment to a pose was a gift to me. And then every day you keep working with it and you find what it is, because that's what the practice is. That's the practice. Not to stop because you don't have it perfectly. So I never agreed with that for a second, and am so utterly grateful at the way that I learned about that. But what I wanted to say is I only do one series at a time. I might have more energy even, but it's one thing to be in Mysore where you don't have anything else to do all day.
Yeah.
It's another thing to be in life. And if you feel that you have to do it, like I was in Brazil some years ago, and one of the teachers that invited me down there, she was doing advanced at the end of first and second. And she said, I'm just hating my practice. And I said, hey, you don't have to do all that. You're not in Mysore. You're working. You have a shala. You're doing all this. So, I'd say if you don't have that much advance, then do up to second, up to Pinchamayurasana, and then go over and do that. And then she was loving her practice again. So you can't take home and do what you've been doing in Mysore without falling apart.
Was it always originally that rigid in Mysore even?
No. No, it wasn't, because Guruji years ago just taught Mysore. And then as the student population grew to such a degree, they started doing the lead classes regularly because they could move everybody through quicker. What I mean?
Yeah.
So, and then somewhere, I know Sharat came along. I mean, Sharat was just a little guy. Like, I don't even know if he was born when I started. I don't know what year he was born.
He was born, but he was he would have been pretty young. Yeah.
And he and Shami used to run in and out of the shala.
Yeah.
So it was play. But, Guruji said he always taught the same. But I wasn't there then. So this is hearsay, but I heard if he saw, once you got to Navasana, when he was actually teaching just the 12 students in his shala, where he was really teaching, he'd see they needed something and he'd give them some different poses. So he did work a little bit with what people needed as they unlocked and opened up. And then once they were in the big shala, all of that went out the window. Yeah.
That's just logistics, isn't it? I mean, the thing is, the tradition has become something which is held so sacrosanctly, as an idea that it's always been the same. But, in talking to all the older teachers, it kind of comes out that it has changed.
Well, yeah, and you hear things like, those banana leaves sure did change over the years, because this man, B.N.S. Iyengar, was one of Krishnamacharya's students, and he taught students the way I initially learned.
The banana leaves, I see. Yeah.
So it did change. The order of it changed, and the Vipassana changed.
Well, how was your attitude in the early days as people? Obviously, you were teaching, and pretty early on, right? How do you see your attitude to the practice and teaching is different to someone getting into it now that's teaching, or the attitude you see currently? I mean, I think it's. Sorry, go on.
No, all I was going to say, what really offended me, and this was a while ago, it felt very Nazi-like. I know Nazi is not the right word, but very militaristic. This is what you do. And it was like, what? Who are you anyway? It's not here like, it's only done this way and don't do it this way. And it was like, God, it felt like, again, a big imposition. And, I taught in the Netherlands, Amsterdam, a long time ago. And I wasn't at the main shala. I taught, somebody invited me that I met in Sri Lanka. And all these students who came had been former Ashtanga students. They were not all practicing it. And all of them loved my teaching. And they said it was just so rigid, and
the way that they've been taught, not your teaching.
The way they were teaching now.
Yeah.
So this was around 10 years ago. So I'm not really up right now on how all of the
it's probably more rigid than ever. Yeah. From on high, let's say. Yeah. But
and I'm sorry for that, because I feel like it becomes a control thing, you know.
You old hippies would have taken that.
Never would. Like Mr. Iyengar, I would never have fallen in love with this practice if I had been introduced to this through Iyengar. Never. I would never have fallen in love with this practice.
If you hadn't been introduced to it through Iyengar?
No, I would. If Iyengar had been my introduction to yoga,
okay,
I never would have had a love affair.
It was a bit tougher, right? So you felt Pattabhi Jois was a bit softer than you know.
No, it's not softer. Yeah. It was just relevant, and it wasn't baloney. Mr. Iyengar was very, very controlling. He was very, very tough.
Yeah.
And the people that I met, none of them did. They might have done intrinsic breathing, but none of them could breathe. They were the most unempowered group of people I ever came across. And, you know, I even did a training one time. My girlfriend convinced me to do a training with a big Iyengar teacher. I didn't even want to. And he and I got into it a little bit. And I said, hey, if I'm not welcome here, he goes, you can stay if you want, or I'll give your money back. So my friend needed a ride. So I ended up enduring the week. But we breathed while we were doing what he taught us. These students were like moaning and groaning. And it was just like so absurd to me. I thought it was absurd. I really did. I thought, this is the most unempowered group of people. And they're always asking for the teacher to, you know. So anyway.
Kind of my experience with it. Yeah. Yeah. What does a yoga lifestyle look like for you now? Sorry. You know, even your 70s, you know, in a kind of more holistic whole, you know, you practice for an hour. We talked a little bit about, you're not vegetarian completely anymore. You know, now and again, you're eating a bit of chicken, you know, and fish, right? I mean, how's the yoga, you know, kind of?
Well, I read spiritual books that I'm inspired to read. I had a very big, the deepest core healing through doing psychotropics with a master. I never did ayahuasca, but working one-on-one with someone who was highly trained in this. Mm-hmm. And I had a type of Kundalini release that was so profound. Since then, I don't, you know, I might go do a meditation with a friend out at Spirit Rock or something with Jack Kornfield or something. But basically, I don't go out looking for anything. I'm just, I feel like life is kind of a moment by moment, paying attention, living the life. I do my best to stay healthy. I read books if I'm drawn. The one I've loved most recently was In Love with the World, which I have the book here, but I forget his name right now. He's a Tibetan man. And I just loved it. So I'm not pursuing in quite the same way.
Right.
I'm in a different place in my life, and I do my best. How do I say this? It's kind of just moment to moment. And I do the things like I love gardening. So I do a lot of gardening. I can't teach right now. Everything got canceled.
You're still teaching, right?
No, well, I have been teaching. I was supposed to be in Cornwall in Ireland.
Oh, really?
I was supposed to be in Greystones, Ireland. And
whereabouts in Cornwall?
Cornwall?
Yeah, whereabouts?
At Limehouse Yoga.
Okay. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Really good guy. Really good guy.
Okay.
And I've been talking to Scott Johnson, trying to work out when it would work out for me to go to London. I was supposed to go to Germany, to Cologne. And and you know, it's so weird. The women in Cologne that I teach for at Ashtanga Connection, and they said, okay, we want you to come back. And so I tried for months. I said, I've never had such a hard time making it feel right. Nothing feels right. Well, in the end, nothing did work because the whole pandemic came about and everything was canceled. We can't even go I think we can fly to Mexico, but we can't even go to Canada, let alone anywhere else. So it's like, Can you travel? Can you go?
Oh, we can't even go more than a kilometer right now here in France. So,
okay.
You know, you've got one on us there. At least you can go to Mexico. I can barely go to buy some groceries.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we have more freedom than you do.
Yeah, you do.
People are wearing
You take it really seriously here. Just to wrap it up, Kathy, because I always try and keep the format for roughly an hour. Can you just off the cuff, as it were, let me know? Mark Roberts loved this question. He actually asked for it to be reinstated. I stopped doing it. What's your guilty pleasure? And what's an inspiration? If you can just think of an inspiration you have, it can be a book, a place, a person, and one, kind of indulgence, let's say, or,
yeah. An indulgence.
Yeah.
Guilty pleasure. Well, I love a little dessert here and there, but I don't know that really.
That's hardly guilty.
It's enough of a guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny? Guilty pleasure.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it?
Getting a pedicure, but I don't even do that anymore.
Yeah, okay, that would be something, maybe. Yeah. I mean, Mark Roberts, for example, said he liked chick flicks on Netflix. He watching.
I almost never ever
that's
watched.
Kind of something you kind of you wouldn't want to admit to, maybe.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I also admitted to enjoying Emily in Paris, and
I haven't seen Emily in Paris, but we were in Ohio without any internet, so we just had to use our iPhone's hotspot. Nor did we have TV, so we've just come back, and so we have watched a few things on Netflix, and it's been so fun. So for me to even watch one thing, I didn't have a television for 20, 30 years, so really, I don't exactly miss it.
Yeah.
But no, I have a guilty pleasure. I love to read novels on my Kindle. And right now I'm reading one from Inspector Bruno from the Dorjogne, written by Martin somebody. But anyway, they're great little mystery stories. I love them. That's my guilty pleasure. And I love to have one going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That is truly the one that my partner thinks I'm just reading dribble. And I go, no, I can't tell you. It's so relaxing for me. I enjoy these stories so much. And my inspiration, I'll tell you, an inspiration I can always count on is being in nature. I love being in nature. And here where I live, I have a gorgeous garden, and we finally got rain. So everything feels alive and wonderful. And there's other inspirations in life, but I would say that. And I feel like my whole yoga journey, it's always been a question of balance. How much is too much? How much isn't enough? Where is that place? And I feel very grateful. Yeah, here it is during this pandemic, but life is good. And, I have a really healthy partnership, and, it's not a lot of work. It's like a pleasure. And, we have enough to eat, and I have a nice place to live, and I feel very grateful, quite honestly.
That's a good note to wrap it up with, Kathy. Thank you for coming on the Healing Yoga podcast.
Nice to meet you. I hope to see you sometime.